The early voting numbers are what they are. This is no spin. It's no BS. Let me walk you through the latest out of Arizona, and this is actually breaking news. Traditionally, here's how it works in Arizona. This is traditionally, before ballot chasing and all the stuff we're doing. Traditionally, we lose early voting, lose, and then we try to close the gap. What happened this time is we've had a double-digit lead, and we anticipated tightening. We've seen that. But yesterday, something remarkable happened. We increased a point of our margin against Democrats of early voting in Arizona. The Republicans, let's put this up on screen, 79. Republicans, 376,000 early votes cast. Democrats, 321,000 early votes cast. Independents, 199,000 early votes cast. Joining us now is a great friend and super smart guy who has been studying this intimately. He sent me a very, very thoughtful series of text messages yesterday, and I told the team, you got to have Jeremy on the show. Jeremy is just looking at numbers. So, Jeremy, I want you to walk through what you're seeing. No emotionality, no predictions. As straight shooting as you can tell us, what are we seeing from the early voting numbers right now?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be on. And I think what we're seeing is things that we should feel good about. And I want to echo your statement that we should act like we're 10 points behind. We need to be out there chasing every ballot. This is certainly not one. But we are seeing the sorts of movements in states where we can track them that should be very encouraging. First of all, in the overall voting in Florida, we're about, just to use kind of one state as an example, we're about 2.5 days into early voting in person. When the Democrats, when we went to early voting in person, the Democrats had a 7% overall advantage due to mail balloting. Mail ballots are continuing to come in, but now the Republicans have flipped that to about a 6% advantage and growing every day. And right now, the trends that we're seeing are looking a lot more like a Florida 2022 type situation, where DeSantis famously won that by about 18 points, than they are between a 2020 type situation where Trump won it by 3. So that's encouraging. But I'd say even more importantly, because I don't think anybody smart who's looking at the numbers thinks Florida's a swing state at this point, but we're seeing things like in Georgia, we're seeing the African-American percentage go down probably a couple percent from where it was in the last selection. And those are, of course, primarily Democratic voters, although Trump has made important inroads into the African-American vote this cycle. And we're seeing white percentage go up a couple points. Well, what's the significance of that? And we're seeing sort of similar things in North Carolina, with the partisan split being a little more obviously pushed toward the Republicans than Democrats than what we had in the last cycle. Well, the significance of that is we don't need to win by 1,100 points to move these states. These were all very tight states. So Georgia was a state that we lost by just, a fraction of a percent last time. And I should probably say lost
10,000 votes.
Yeah, I mean, it was nothing, right? And so if you're even getting a 1 or 2% move in the electorate, in North Carolina, we won by like 1.2%, 1.3%. It's game over. We're going to win those states. Now, of course, we have to hold that. But those trends are very encouraging that we're seeing that. In Nevada, where ever since the Harry Reid machine kind of, came on the scene in the late 1990s, the Democrats have always pulled up huge margins early on in the absentee balloting, particularly in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. So just in the last election cycle, we've gone from a dramatic registration deficit among Republicans versus Democrats to being almost even. And what we're seeing right now is an unprecedented lead of about 2 or 3 percentage points by the Republicans over the Democrats in the state of Nevada, which is often pretty correlated with Arizona, a state you obviously know a lot about. And, again, I can go through more states, but I'll just kind of leave it there as a starting point. We're seeing, again, not that it's going to be some 70,000 point blowout, but we're seeing even conservatively right now the couple points of movement at the very least that we're going to need to pull in these states and put Donald Trump in the White House.
So the objection that some people have, Jeremy, is like, oh, this is just day of voters that are translating. Even if that was the case, that's not a big deal because they're still voting and it clears up the traffic jam. But actually, we're seeing Republicans crush in early voting. Explain more.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a
low
couple
propensity voting.
Yeah, low propensity voting. So what we're seeing, and again, there's a couple of good accounts that have looked at this. There's an account called Data Republican that has done some good work in North Carolina and Florida, where you can look at these low propensity voters, what we call 0 of 1 or 0 of 4 or 1 of 4, 2 of 4 voters. These are people who voted in 0, 1, or 2 of the last 4 elections. So not people we can count on at every time. And what you see, for example, in North Carolina is the Democrats are really the ones cannibalizing their votes. So they lead by several percent in the early voting among so-called 4 out of 4 voters. That is voters who are going to vote every time, whether they vote early or whether they vote on election day. But what we're seeing among very low propensity voters is we're seeing the Republicans with an edge there, and the delta between those, depending on how frequent the voter is 5 or 6%. Now that may not sound huge, but in terms of the overall election, I mean that's the ball game. If we're bringing out our voters who don't always vote, and we continue to do that through election day, we're going to win. So again, I want to stress, I'm not saying, oh, it's over, it's done with. Nothing is done until the last ballot is counted on election day, or in some of these states, unfortunately, far after that. But we should be encouraged, not just in a kind of, oh, I want to say things are wonderful type way. I think the trends look really good for us right now.
So I want to reinforce a point you said briefly, Jeremy. In 2020, we fell 41,000 ballots short in 3 states. How are we doing in such low propensity, independent voting, and early voting? How are we doing at this time in 2020, 4 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, well, we were doing worse, and then in other states where, again, it's a little trickier. I mean, I think part of the trick right now is that the 3 states that I think this probably most hinges on, because I think we are going to take Arizona, I think we are going to take North Carolina and Georgia, and I think we're gonna take Nevada too. So it kind of will come down to some of these upper Midwest states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. We don't have as much. Every state gives you different types of voting data that you can query. Some give you partisan, some don't. Some tell you whether they voted before, and others don't have as easy records to query on that. But what we are seeing, for example, is in 2020, and I don't have these numbers exactly correct, but just sort of ballpark, it was like 65 to 22, the early ballots in Pennsylvania were for the Democrats. And then in 2022, which was a really good year for the Democrats in Pennsylvania, it got even worse. It was like 68 to 18 for the Democrats, and the rest of those were independents. Well, what we're seeing right now is those early votes are something like the current requests, I think, are about 59 to 29 or 58 to 29. And the Republicans are gaining on that rapidly. And we're going to wind up, as opposed to starting on election day with a 40+ point deficit in terms of partisan split that we're going to have to make up, that's going to be more on the order of 20-25%. So huge difference, even though the Democrats are still doing better. And if you're a Pennsylvania voter, please go out. You can actually vote in person, even with your absentee ballot today. But things look a lot better. In Wisconsin, we're seeing some similar things. Again, it's a less transparent state than a state like Florida, where I can really tell you every 15 minutes what's going on. But if we look at the early vote right now coming from the strong Republican counties versus the strong Democratic counties, the strong Republican counties are turning out much more of their electorate in ways that they haven't always done in the past. And again, when you're looking at a thing where we don't need to move the needle a million votes, right? We need to move it a couple percent. And I think we are seeing that, and we are seeing the turnout of low propensity voters. And Charlie, I know that's got to be gratifying to you, because it's something I know you and Turning Point have put a huge amount of emphasis on, both in Arizona and nationally. And I think now we're seeing the fruits of that work. And so it's really gratifying, I'm sure.